I never thought I'd be afraid of my own son. When I moved in with him after retiring, I thought it would be peaceful. Dinners together, quiet mornings, maybe a bit of laughter. But every night at exactly 3 a.m., I heard the sound of water running from the bathroom, long, steady, like someone trying to wash something away. At first, I told myself it was nothing, but one night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I walked down the hallway, my heart pounding, and pushed the door open just a little. What I saw inside, it broke something in me. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even stay for breakfast. The next morning, I packed my bags and left that house for good, because once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. My name is Marion Blake. I'm 67 years old, and for most of my life, I've been a literature teacher in a small town outside Seattle, the kind of town where nothing ever changes. Same gray sky, same wind that smells of pine and chalk dust. I spent 40 years teaching teenagers to find meaning in words that no longer mean much to them. When I finally retired, the classroom emptied, but the sound of my voice stayed, echoing through my old house. Sometimes I still spoke out loud, out of habit as if my students were there. Tomorrow, I'd say, we'll read Sylvia Plath. But there was no tomorrow anymore. Only me, the creak of the wooden floor, and the clock that ticked too loudly. The house had been mine for 15 years since my husband's death, yet it never felt like mine. It was the place I ran to, not the place I built. Every corner of it still smelled faintly of him, of old coffee, cigarette smoke, and fear. I used to scrub the floors so hard my hands bled, trying to erase him from the walls. But you can't scrub out memories. They hide in the cracks, waiting for silence. On the mantel stood one photo I never had the courage to throw away, my husband smiling that cold, polite smile that fooled everyone. I kept it inside a wooden box along with a few other things. A folded hospital bill, a letter he never finished, and one photo where his hand was on my shoulder, too tight. I used to tell myself keeping that box was closure, but maybe it was punishment. That morning I started packing for real this time. A few old notebooks, a paintbrush that had long lost its color, and the wooden box. I hesitated before picking it up. The lid stuck slightly, as if even it didn't want to be opened. I could almost hear him saying, "Don't forget who you belong to." Sometimes I still dream about water. It always starts the same way. I'm standing in the old bathroom, the tiles cold under my feet. The sink overflows and I reach out to turn off the faucet, but the water doesn't stop. It keeps rising, clear at first, then dark, until I can't see my reflection anymore. And just before I wake up, I always hear a whisper, "Don't close it, let it come out." That dream came again the night before my son called. When the phone rang that morning, I almost didn't answer. It had been months since Julian last called. My only son, my pride, and my guilt all at once. "Mom," he said, his tone halfway between gentle and commanding, "you shouldn't be alone out there. Come live with us. The condo has an extra room. It's time." For a moment I couldn't speak. I looked around at the house. The chipped paint, the sunlight trapped behind yellow curtains, the silence that pressed against my chest. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt my pulse quicken, a familiar chill crawling up my neck. "I'm fine here," I said softly. "Really, I am." "Mom." His voice sharpened just slightly. "You've done enough on your own. It's not safe for you anymore. I'll come get you this weekend." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a decision already made. After we hung up, I stood in front of the mirror. Half my face looked old. The lines around my mouth, the silver streaks in my hair. The other half looked frightened. As if some part of me already knew. Moving in with my son shouldn't have scared me. He'd grown into a successful man with a good job and a wife who always smiled in photos. He'd promised me comfort, company, and a better life. But promises like that, I'd heard them before. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the box again. My fingers brushed the wood, tracing the grain like it could tell me what to do. Inside, somewhere under the folded letters, was the photograph, the one where I was smiling through a bruise. I never told Julian what his father had done. He was too young, too innocent. Or maybe I just couldn't bear to let him see the monster I had married. I told myself that by keeping quiet, I was protecting him. But silence doesn't protect anyone. It just plants seeds in the dark. The next morning, the sky was pale and wet. I made coffee, sat by the window, and watched the mist roll down the hill. For years, that sight had been my peace. But now, for the first time, it made me uneasy, as if the house itself was tired of waiting for me to leave. When Julian's car pulled into the driveway that weekend, I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. He stepped out, tall, confident, wearing a sharp suit even on a Saturday. I could see his father in the set of his jaw. "Ready, Mom?" he said. I nodded, forcing a smile. He walked inside, looked around and said, "You really should have moved out sooner. This place is falling apart." He said it with the same tone his father once used, half concerned, half judgment. I felt something twist inside me, but I swallowed it down and told myself it didn't matter, that it was only his way of caring. We loaded my boxes into his car. The last thing I did before locking the door was turn back and look at the house. My house, the one that had kept my secrets for 15 years. The air inside was still, heavy like it knew something I didn't. The neighbor waved from her porch. "You're leaving, Marion? City life's not for me, but I guess your son wants the best for you." I smiled and said, He always does." But as the car rolled away, the road bending toward the city skyline, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house wasn't relieved to see me go. It looked almost patient, like it knew I'd be back, or that what I was running from was already waiting for me on the other side. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of water echoed in my head, the faucet, the dream, the whisper. "Don't close it," it said again. And I realized too late that the thing I had been trying to shut off all these years wasn't water at all. It was memory. And memory doesn't stop just because you leave the house behind. I looked at my packed suitcase, at the photo of my son I tucked into the pocket and whispered, half to him, half to myself, "I don't know, Julian. Maybe I shouldn't come. Maybe some doors are meant to stay closed." But I already knew the truth. The invitation he gave me that morning would take me right back to the place I'd been running from all along. The first thing I noticed when we arrived was how quiet it was. Rainview Towers wasn't just an apartment building. It was one of those places where silence costs money. Thick carpets, polished marble floors, and glass walls that made the city look smaller than it really was. David parked in the underground garage and helped me out of the car. "You'll like it here, Mom," he said in that flat, confident tone he always used, the tone of someone who never expected to be disagreed with. Anna was waiting by the door upstairs. She smiled, tired but kind. "Welcome home, Mom." Her voice trembled just a little, the way mine used to tremble when I had to speak around Robert. The apartment was beautiful, almost too beautiful. Everything was perfectly arranged, every picture frame aligned, every cushion smoothed out. There wasn't a single fingerprint on the glass table. David gestured to the corner near the wall. "You can leave your suitcase here. We'll keep things organized, no clutter." No clutter. He said it like a rule, not a suggestion. I nodded and smiled, trying to sound grateful. "It's lovely, David, really." He walked ahead, his hand resting briefly on Anna's back. Not a touch of affection, more like a reminder of control. I noticed the way she flinched, just a fraction, as if her body remembered something before her mind did. Dinner that night was quiet. Too quiet. Anna had made roast chicken, steamed vegetables, a glass of red wine for each of us. David talked mostly about work, mergers, deadlines, people who didn't meet expectations. He spoke like he was still in the office, not sitting across from his mother. Anna barely said a word. When she reached for the bottle to pour me more wine, her hand trembled slightly, and the glass slipped. The red wine spilled across the white tablecloth, spreading like a stain that wouldn't stop growing. For a moment, no one moved. Then David picked up a napkin, smiled, that slow, controlled smile that made my stomach turn, and said, "Accidents happen when people get distracted." He pressed his hand down on the napkin, then on the glass. The stem snapped with a sharp crack. Tiny shards glittered under the light. He didn't even look at them. Anna froze. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. David just kept smiling. "Be careful next time." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The sound of the breaking glass had already pulled me somewhere else. Another dining table, another night, another man. Robert, my husband, had once done the exact same thing. Not with wine, but with a coffee mug. I'd spilled some on his shirt. He'd smiled, wiped it slowly, then crushed the mug in his fist, cutting his palm open. He said the same words, "Accidents happen when people get distracted." That night came rushing back so vividly that I felt my chest tighten. I pressed my hand against my lap to stop it from shaking. After dinner, Anna and I washed the dishes together. She kept her head down, scrubbing too hard, like she was trying to clean more than just plates. "He means well," she said quietly, not looking at me. "He just wants everything perfect." Her voice broke slightly on the word perfect. I wanted to tell her that I knew that tone, that I had once used those same words to defend the man who hurt me. But the words stuck in my throat, so I just nodded and said, "I understand." Because I did. Too well. When we finished, she smiled politely and excused herself to put the baby to sleep. I walked out to the living room, where the city lights shimmered through the glass wall. Everything looked peaceful from up here. Peaceful and unreal. Then I heard it. The sound of running water. It was faint at first, like a whisper. Coming from the hallway bathroom. I turned, half expecting to see Anna cleaning something. But when I peeked down the hall, the light was off. The door was slightly ajar. I stepped closer. The sound grew louder, steady, rhythmic. But when I looked inside, the sink was dry. The faucet wasn't even turned on. For a moment, I thought it was my imagination. But as I stood there staring into that dark bathroom, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. That slow, creeping cold that starts at the base of your spine and spreads until your whole body feels hollow. Behind me, David's voice called out, "Mom, everything okay?" I turned, forcing a smile. Yes, I just thought I heard something. He watched me for a few seconds, eyes unreadable. Then he nodded and the sound stopped. Just like that. Later that night, I lay awake in the guest room. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint buzz of city traffic below. Anna had said goodnight hours ago, her smile thin and forced. David's footsteps had echoed down the hall, then disappeared behind their bedroom door. But I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying that sound. The rush of water, the breaking glass, the careful smile. In the dark, I whispered to myself, "He's not Robert. He's not." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. I turned to face the window, hoping the lights would calm me. Instead, the reflection stared back. Not of me, but of the woman I used to be years ago, when I thought I could fix a man's temper with patience. The apartment was beautiful, yes, but it didn't feel alive. It felt staged, like a place meant for display, not for living. Even the silence was curated, the kind of silence that hides more than it reveals. Around midnight, I heard footsteps again, slow, heavy, moving toward the bathroom. Then the faint click of the lock, and then the water started running. I sat up, holding my breath. 3 sharp knocks of the pipes, then the steady flow, 3 Augs AM. The sound went on and on. I wanted to believe it was nothing. Maybe David couldn't sleep. Maybe he needed a shower to calm down. But deep down, I already knew better. Because the sound of that water, the rhythm, the timing, it was the same as in my dreams. The same whisper underneath it. "Don't close it. Let it come out." I didn't move. Didn't even breathe. The sound stopped suddenly, leaving behind a silence that was somehow louder than the noise. And that's when I realized something. I had lived with silence for years. I thought I was used to it. But this silence, this perfect, heavy, waiting silence was different. It wasn't peace. It was warning. I had lived with silence all my life, but silence was the one thing that made the sound of water unbearable. By the 3rd night, I had stopped pretending that I could sleep. The apartment was too clean, too silent, too still, like a place that refused to breathe. I lay on the bed, watching the red digits on the clock glow in the dark. 2:57. 2:58. Each second felt like it was ticking inside my chest instead of on the wall. Then, right on cue, the sound began again. The sound of water. At first it was faint, like a whisper somewhere in the pipes, but within seconds it grew louder, pouring hard and fast, echoing through the corridor. It was the same rhythm as before, steady and relentless, like someone washing something away. I sat up, listening. The noise came from the main bathroom down the hall. Light spilled softly from under the door, thin and trembling, as if the room itself was alive. My hand was already on the doorknob of my bedroom before I even realized it. My body moved on instinct, driven by a mix of fear and something darker, the need to know. I stepped out. The hallway was dim, washed in the pale light from the bathroom. The air smelled faintly of chlorine and metal. My feet were cold against the wooden floor. As I walked closer, I began to hear something else. Not just water, but a muffled sob, soft and broken. Then a man's voice cut through it, low and sharp, almost a growl. "Don't talk back to me, Anna." I said, "Look at me." My heart clenched so hard I thought it would stop. My knees weakened. I reached the door, which wasn't fully closed. Through the narrow gap, I saw what my mind refused to accept. David was standing inside, still wearing his shirt, water streaming down his shoulders. His hand was twisted in Anna's hair, dragging her head back under the cold spray. Her body shook uncontrollably, her soaked nightgown clinging to her skin as she tried to cover her face. The sound of water splashing against tile mixed with the quick, gasping rhythm of her breath. He leaned in, his expression calm, too calm, and slapped her once across the face. The sound of it was sharp and final, echoing off the bathroom walls, louder than the water itself. For a split second, I couldn't see my son anymore. I saw Robert. I saw the man who had once dragged me into our bathroom at midnight, furious because I spilled coffee on his shirt. I saw his reflection in the mirror, his eyes full of rage and satisfaction, as he forced my head toward the sink and let the water run over my face until I couldn't breathe. The smell, the sound, the cold shock against my skin. It was all there again, alive, unchanged. I wanted to move. I wanted to scream, to pull David off her, to stop it before it went any further. But my body froze. My breath came shallow and uneven, and my hands trembled against the doorframe. The same fear that had once kept me silent in my marriage now held me prisoner in my son's home. My mind screamed at me to do something, but my feet stepped back on their own, one slow retreating motion at a time. I turned away. I could still hear her crying. A quiet, strangled sound swallowed by the water. Each step I took felt heavier, like walking through mud. When I reached my room, I closed the door without making a sound and pressed my back against it. The noise from the bathroom echoed faintly through the walls. I slid down onto the floor, my hands covering my ears, but I could still hear it. That endless rush of water, the same rhythm that had haunted me all these years. It felt as if time folded in on itself. I was no longer 67. I was 30 again, sitting on the bathroom floor after another night of apologies that never came. My son was only a child back then, sleeping in the next room, his small breaths steady, unaware. I had sworn he would never grow up to be like his father. I thought I had broken the cycle by leaving, by surviving. But as I sat there trembling in that dark room, I understood the cruel truth. I hadn't broken anything. I had only passed it on. When the water finally stopped, the silence that followed was almost unbearable. It was heavy, thick, accusing. I pressed my palm against my mouth, afraid that if I spoke, I would start screaming and never stop. My body ached from holding still too long. My heart felt like it was beating somewhere outside of me. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed. The apartment went quiet again, peaceful almost. If someone had walked in at that moment, they would have thought the night was calm, that nothing had happened here. But I knew better. The silence wasn't calm. It was hiding something, holding its breath, waiting for the next sound. And as I sat there in the dark, shaking and ashamed, a thought came to me, clear and cold as the water still dripping in my ears. I thought I was looking at my husband, but it was my son. The morning after felt unreal, like nothing had happened. Sunlight poured into the apartment, soft and golden, touching the glass walls and polished floors, as if trying to cleanse what had taken place in the dark just hours before. But no light could reach that corner of my mind anymore. Anna was already in the kitchen when I came out. She smiled as soon as she saw me, cheerful, polite, exactly the way a perfect daughter-in-law should be. Her hair was damp, twisted neatly into a bun, and there was a scarf around her neck, thin and silk-like, though it was far too warm for scarves that day. She turned back to the stove. "Good morning, Mom. Did you sleep well?" I forced a smile. "I did," I lied. David sat at the dining table, scrolling through his phone, a cup of coffee steaming beside him. He looked perfectly composed, not a trace of exhaustion, not a shadow of guilt. When Anna placed his breakfast in front of him, he looked up at her briefly and said, "We all have to learn discipline." He said it calmly, as if it were an ordinary sentence, as if those words didn't carry the weight of cruelty. I didn't know if he was speaking to her or to me. Either way, it felt like a warning. As I stirred my coffee, my hands trembled slightly. The sound of the spoon tapping against the porcelain seemed louder than usual. The entire apartment, with all its gleaming perfection, suddenly felt like a cage. Quiet, beautiful, and utterly suffocating. I couldn't stop hearing the echo of the water from the night before. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a presence, something that clung to the walls, to the air, to my skin. When I glanced at Anna, I noticed she wasn't eating. She just sat there with her fork in her hand, nodding occasionally at David's words. Her eyes were distant, her smile fixed. I recognized that expression instantly. It was the same one I used to wear every morning after a beating, the face that said, "I'm fine. I'm still here. Let's pretend this is normal." After breakfast, David left for work. His footsteps echoed down the hallway, crisp and measured. When the elevator doors finally closed behind him, the apartment exhaled. Anna stood at the sink, washing the dishes slowly, her movements careful, almost ritualistic. I watched her for a while before I found the courage to speak. "Anna," I said softly, "are you happy here?" She paused, her hands still submerged in the soapy water. For a few seconds, she didn't answer. Then she looked up, smiled, and said, "Of course, Mom. I'm lucky. He takes care of everything." Her voice was gentle, almost convincing, but her eyes said something else. They were hollow, heavy, the eyes of someone who had learned that survival depends on saying the right words at the right time. When she turned away to place a dish on the rack, the scarf around her neck shifted slightly. I caught a glimpse of her shoulder, a faint purple bruise peeking from him, under the fabric, round and deep, the kind that doesn't come from bumping into a wall. My stomach turned. My heart started to beat faster. She noticed my silence and quickly adjusted the scarf. "I'm fine, Mom," she said quietly, not looking at me. "Really, don't worry." I wanted to reach for her hand to say something, anything, that might break through that wall of fear, but the words wouldn't come. I just stood there, frozen, my throat tight, the air thick between us. In that moment, I realized I was doing the same thing I had done for years in my own marriage, pretending not to see, not to hear, not to know. I had called it survival back then. I told myself silence was protection, that it was the only way to keep peace, to keep myself alive. But now, here I was again, sitting in another house, watching another woman suffer, and I was silent all over again. That night, I stayed in my room after dinner. The walls seemed closer somehow, the shadows darker. I could hear the faint clatter of dishes being put away, the soft murmur of voices from down the hall. I couldn't make out the words, but I could tell from the tone that they weren't kind. I pressed my hand to my chest, trying to steady my breath. The apartment's perfection felt almost mocking. The glossy surfaces, the quiet hum of the air conditioner, the scent of expensive candles covering something rotten underneath. Every small sound, the click of a light switch, the drip of a faucet, the closing of a door, made me flinch. For the first time, I understood that the ghosts I was living with weren't confined to memory. They were here, in this house, wearing new faces, repeating old patterns. I wasn't just haunted by my husband anymore. I was haunted by my own silence. When I finally lay down, the ceiling above me looked endless, white and empty. I thought of Anna's bruises, of David's calm tone, of the way I had looked away. My chest hurt with the weight of everything I hadn't said. Maybe this was what fate meant by inheritance. Not money, not possessions, but pain, passed down like a secret. I closed my eyes and whispered to the dark. I used to stay silent to survive. Now I stay silent to hide. I once kept silent to survive. Now I keep silent to avoid the truth. When I finally left Rainview Towers, I didn't tell David or Anna I was going. I just packed a small suitcase and took the morning bus to Silver Pines, the retirement home on the edge of town. The building sat quietly between two rows of pine trees, far from the city and even farther from the sound of traffic. I told myself I needed peace, a place without echoes, without memories, without water. They gave me a small room on the second floor. It had a bed, a wooden chair, and a window that looked out over the forest. The staff asked if I wanted a private bathroom, but I said no. I didn't want one. I chose a room without a sink, without a faucet, without a single pipe that could make that sound again. The only water I could see was the rain outside, and that was enough. The first night, I sat by the window for hours, watching the pine branches sway. The air smelled clean, almost sharp, like earth after a storm. When the rain began to fall, I tried to convince myself it was comforting, natural, harmless, something good. But the longer I listened, the more it felt like the world was whispering a reminder I didn't want to hear. I went to bed early, but sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes. Anna's bruised shoulder, David's hand gripping her hair, the stream of cold water pouring over both of them. I turned on my side, buried my face in the pillow, and forced myself to breathe slowly. At some point, I must have drifted off. And then I heard it. Water. Not the gentle kind from outside, not rain. It was close, too close. A steady trickle, then a rush, like someone had turned on a faucet right next to my bed. My eyes shot open, but I couldn't move. The room was dark and the sound was everywhere, filling the air like it had seeped through the walls. I wanted to tell myself it wasn't real, but then I heard a voice. Soft, familiar. A woman's voice. "You left her." It wasn't angry. It wasn't even loud, just tired. My throat went dry. I tried to speak, to say something, anything, but no words came. The voice repeated a little closer this time. "You left her." I wanted to scream, but all I could do was cover my ears and whisper, "I couldn't help her." My hands were shaking. I shut my eyes so tightly that the darkness pressed against my skull. When I finally opened them, the room was quiet again. No water, no voice. Just the sound of my heart pounding. Morning came gray and heavy. I sat at the small table near the window, staring out at the fog between the trees. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. Breakfast tasted like paper. After lunch, one of the nurses reminded me I had my first therapy session. Her voice was kind, almost motherly. "You'll like Dr. Nora," she said. "She listens." The therapy room was bright, almost too bright. There were drawings on the wall, colored by other residents, flowers, birds, oceans. I sat across from Dr. Nora, a woman, with kind eyes and a notebook she rarely wrote in. For a long time, she didn't speak. She just waited. Finally, she asked, "What are you afraid to hear?" It was such a simple question, but it hit me like a blow. My throat tightened. The answer came out before I could stop it. "Running water." She nodded as if she understood exactly what I meant. "Why?" I looked at my hands resting on my knees. The skin was thin, the veins visible, the same hands that once held my son as a baby, the same hands that later held the door shut, while his wife cried in the next room. "Because it never stops," I said softly. "Even when it's quiet, I can still hear it. It's the sound of something washing away, and something refusing to be washed away." Dr. Nora said nothing. She just watched me, her eyes gentle but searching. I wanted her to say it wasn't my fault, that I had done what I could, that it wasn't too late. But she didn't. She just let the silence sit between us until I realized she was waiting for me to say something else. So I did. "Maybe peace isn't what I'm looking for," I whispered. "Maybe peace is just another way of killing what's left of my conscience." Dr. Nora leaned forward, still quiet. I looked at her, and for the first time I saw the truth reflected in her eyes. Not pity, but recognition. The session ended soon after. I walked back to my room alone. The hallway smelled faintly of disinfectant and rain. Somewhere outside, a bird was singing. When I closed my door, I leaned against it and listened. No water, no sound, only silence. And somehow, that silence hurt more than anything else. Maybe the peace I've been chasing is just my way of slowly killing what's left of my conscience. Teresa was the last person I expected to see again. We had taught at the same high school years ago, before my marriage fell apart, before she left to do something that mattered, as she used to say. Now, she was standing in front of me at the community center, a clipboard in hand, wearing a simple gray cardigan and that same calm, steady smile she used to have in the teacher's lounge. "Marion Blake," she said, her voice soft but full of warmth. "I heard you moved to Silver Pines. I didn't expect you to find your way here so soon." "I didn't either," I admitted. The building was called Haven's Light Shelter, a small but busy center that offered counseling and support groups for survivors of domestic abuse. I had come only because Dr. Nora suggested it during our last session. "You don't have to speak," she told me. "Just listen." So I listened. The meeting room was painted pale yellow with folding chairs arranged in a circle. A pot of coffee sat in the corner, untouched. The women there came in all shapes and ages, a young girl who couldn't have been more than 20, an older woman with silver hair like mine, and a few in between. No one looked at anyone for too long. It was the kind of silence that carried respect, not avoidance. Teresa began the session by introducing herself and explaining the rules. Confidentiality, respect, no judgment. Her voice had a strength I envied. Then she said, "This is a space for stories. Sometimes they hurt to tell, sometimes they hurt to hear, but we speak because silence almost killed us." Her words made something twist inside me. I kept my eyes on the floor. When it was the young woman's turn to speak, she hesitated. Her hands were trembling slightly. "He threw me into the shower," she said, her voice flat, detached, as if describing someone else's life. Because I was too quiet. He said silence made him angry. The room went still. Even the air seemed to stop moving. I felt it immediately, a wave rising from somewhere deep in my chest, too strong to hold back. The words she said echoed through every corner of my mind. The sound of the water, the cold tile, the sting of humiliation. My hands started to shake, my throat closed up. I couldn't breathe. "I'm sorry," I whispered, pushing my chair back. "I need some air." I stood up and walked out before anyone could stop me. The hallway outside was narrow and dim. I leaned against the wall, pressing my palm over my mouth to keep from crying too loud. My body felt heavy, like grief had weight. I thought I had left it behind at Rainview Towers, or maybe in the ashes of the house I abandoned years ago. But grief follows. It waits, patient, until you're too tired to fight. I heard footsteps behind me. Teresa. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there beside me until my breathing slowed. Then quietly, she said, "You know, I used to run out too." I turned toward her. Her eyes were kind, but there was something behind them, something that had seen its share of pain. She put her arm gently around my shoulders. "We can't save our younger selves, Marion," she said softly, "but we can save someone else's." Those words stayed with me long after I went back to Silver Pines. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, staring at the pine trees swaying under the moonlight. The silence outside was deep, heavy, almost sacred. But inside me, something restless stirred. Not fear this time, but something closer to defiance. I opened the wooden box I had brought from my old house, the one I'd carried through every move, every phase of my life. It was the last thing I hadn't been able to let go of. Inside were a few photographs, some old letters, and one envelope I had never opened. It was from Robert. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, the kind of writing that tried to look gentle. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. The letter was short. "You made me do it. I only lose control when you push me. Don't make me hurt you again. I love you." I read it once, then again, slower. Every word felt like a knife twisting back open a wound I thought had healed. I remembered the night he wrote it, the blood on my lip, the apology that came too late. And yet for years, I had kept this letter as if it were proof of love instead of proof of harm. Now, sitting in this quiet room at Silver Pines, I realized I wasn't keeping it out of forgiveness. I was keeping it out of guilt. Guilt for surviving, guilt for staying silent, guilt for raising a son who had learned his father's lessons too well. I went to the small kitchenette, lit a candle I wasn't supposed to have, and held the letter over the flame. The edges curled almost instantly. The paper blackened, then disintegrated, the words turning into smoke. I watched the ash drift down into the sink like falling snow. For a moment it looked like rain. Soft, harmless, cleansing. But even as I watched it vanish, I knew the fire hadn't erased anything. You can burn paper, but not memory. What it did, though, was give me permission. Not to forget, but to start forgiving myself. I stood there until the last ember went out, then whispered, "I couldn't save myself. But maybe I can save her." I wasn't sure who her meant. Anna, the young woman from the shelter, or the frightened girl I used to be. Maybe all of them. For the first time in years, I felt something inside me unclench. The sound of running water no longer felt like punishment. It felt like a promise. A voice saying, "You can still do something." I didn't know what that something was yet, but I knew where I had to start. Tomorrow, I would go back to Haven's Light. Not to listen this time, to speak. I couldn't save myself, but maybe I can save her. Teresa was the one who said it first. "You can't just feel sorry, Marion. You have to act." Her words followed me for days. I didn't answer right away, but something in me had already shifted. The image of Anna, her bruised wrist, her forced smile, her silence, wouldn't let me sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her sitting at that dining table, pretending everything was fine, the same way I once did. So I called Teresa. She picked up on the first ring. "I was waiting for you to say it," she said. "Say what?" "That you're ready." She didn't waste time. That afternoon, she drove me to meet Patrick Hale, a lawyer who volunteered with Haven's Light Shelter. He was in his 50s, kind-eyed, calm, the sort of man who had seen too much and no longer shocked easily. His office was small, lined with case files and old coffee cups. Teresa introduced us, then left the two of us alone. Patrick listened carefully as I told him everything. About David, about Anna, about the night of the shower, the bruises, the fear, the silence. I kept my eyes on my hands the whole time. When I finished, he didn't ask me why I hadn't spoken sooner. He just nodded and said, "It's not too late." Then he began outlining what needed to be done. "Evidence is everything," he said. "Without it, the law can't protect her. If she can record his threats, capture any physical harm, document his words, we can build a case, but we have to be careful, very careful." He scribbled notes on a yellow pad. "You'll need a safe way to communicate, somewhere he won't look." I nodded. "He checks her phone every night." Patrick thought for a moment. "Then we go old school, voice recorders, hidden cameras if possible. But first, she needs to know she's not alone." That night, I sat at my small desk in Silver Pines, staring at the email address Patrick had helped me set up. A new account, anonymous, encrypted. It felt strange, like I was stepping into someone else's life, one with purpose and danger all over again. I wrote to Anna. The message was simple. "Anna, it's Mom. You're not alone. If you can talk safely, call from a public phone or reply from your work email. If not, just write OK in the subject line. That's enough." The reply came 2 days later. The subject line said only, "OK." That was the start. Weeks passed in a blur of careful messages, coded words, and sleepless nights. Patrick guided every step. I was the bridge between them. The quiet grandmother in a retirement home who suddenly lived two lives, one filled with routine and small talk, the other built on fear, secrecy, and fragile hope. When Anna finally managed to call, her voice was barely a whisper. "He checks my phone every night," she said. "He reads my messages. Sometimes he even smells my clothes when I come home. I can't breathe." "You'll get out," I promised, though my own voice trembled. "But we need proof first. Just one piece strong enough to make him fall." "How?" she asked. I looked down at the list Patrick had written. Audio first. "There's a small voice recorder," I said. "I'm sending it to you. Hide it somewhere he'll never think to look." Anna hesitated. "He searches everything." I looked around my own room, thinking. My eyes landed on the water bottle beside my bed. Clear plastic, half full. "In your bottle," I said. "Tape it under the label. He'll never notice." Silence on the line. Then a small shaking laugh. "That's clever, Mom." A few days later, she sent a message through our hidden email. "It's done. I'll try tonight. I didn't sleep." I sat by the window in the dark, staring out at the pines. Every sound made me flinch. When the notification tone finally chimed near dawn, I nearly dropped my phone. There was an audio file attached. No subject line. Just one word in the body of the email, Aurora. I clicked play. At first, only static, then footsteps, a door creaking, a man's voice. Calm, measured, familiar. "You think you can leave me?" David said. "You'll never leave me. No one does." Then a slap, a muffled cry, a thud. I stopped the recording, my whole body shaking. My breath came out in small, broken gasps. I pressed my palm against my chest, as if I could stop my heart from pounding so hard. That night, I sent the file to Patrick with the subject line proof. He replied within minutes. "This is enough to start. Don't delete it. Don't contact him. Stay alert." But fear has its own sense of timing. The next evening, my phone rang. The screen lit up with a number I still knew by heart. David. For a second, I couldn't move. The sound of the ringtone filled the room like a warning siren. I forced myself to answer. "Mom," he said. His voice was calm, almost casual. "Did you talk to Anna today?" My throat went dry. "No," I said. "Why would I?" He paused. Just a few seconds, but long enough for me to hear something behind the calm. Suspicion. "Strange," he said finally. "She's been distant. You know how she gets." I swallowed hard. "She's probably just tired, David. You've been working her too hard." He laughed softly, but it wasn't a nice sound. "Always the teacher, still lecturing, even now?" "I'm just saying," he cut me off. "You don't have to worry about her. I take care of my family." There was something in the way he said "take care" that made the hairs on my arms rise. Then he added almost lazily, "You sound nervous, Mom." "Everything okay at Silver Pines?" "I'm fine," I managed. "Good. Keep it that way." And then he hung up. The silence that followed was worse than the sound of his voice. It pressed down on me thick and heavy. I sat there for a long time, the phone still in my hand staring at the blank screen. In the reflection of the dark window, I could see my own face, pale, drawn, afraid. I had thought leaving that apartment meant I was safe, but now I knew safety was an illusion. As long as he breathed, no one was safe. I turned off the light and sat in the dark, my mind spinning. I thought about the recording, about Anna's voice, about the risk she'd taken just to send me that file. There was no turning back. For the first time in my life, I didn't want to run. The fear was still there, pulsing, cold, alive, but beneath it was something stronger. Resolve. I whispered it out loud, just to hear how it sounded. I won't run this time. And in that moment, I meant it. This time I know I can't run. It started with a message. I'm telling him tonight. I read those 4 words over and over, my hands trembling so badly that I almost dropped the phone. The clock on my bedside table read 11:47 p.m. Rain was tapping against the window, soft at first, then harder, like someone knocking, asking to be let in. I typed back, "Are you sure?" No reply. I tried again. "Anna, wait for tomorrow. Let Patrick be there." Still nothing. By midnight, the rain had turned into a storm. Wind howled through the pine trees outside, bending their tall silhouettes like dark figures bowing to something cruel and unseen. I sat in the dark, phone in my lap, heart pounding. 12:13 a.m. The first call came, a scream, high, sharp. Then the sound of glass shattering, once, twice, followed by a man's voice, low and furious. I froze. My mind couldn't catch up to what I was hearing. I pressed the phone to my ear, whispering, "Anna, Anna." No answer, just chaos. The sound of something heavy hitting the floor. And then, silence. A silence so deep it felt like the whole world had stopped breathing. The call ended. I stared at the screen. My reflection in the black glass didn't look like me, pale, wild-eyed, desperate. I tried to call back. Once. Twice. The line was dead. I stood up so fast the chair fell behind me. My knees nearly gave out. For a moment I didn't know what to do. Call the police? Patrick? Teresa? My mind spun in circles, and then the phone rang again. David. I hesitated, every instinct screamed not to pick up. But I did. "Mom," his voice said, calm, steady, wrong. "She's gone." My heart stopped. "What do you mean, gone?" He laughed, a sound that didn't belong in this world. "You wanted this, didn't you? You made her think she could leave. You filled her head with lies." "David, please." "You wanted to save her," he said, voice tightening, almost breaking. "Well, you did. She's free now." Something inside me broke. "Where is she?" I shouted, but my voice came out hoarse, barely human. He didn't answer. All I heard was the sound of rain, distant, steady, and the faint clinking of glass under his shoes. Then the line went dead again. I dropped the phone. The room seemed to spin. I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself, but the weight of what I'd just heard pressed down like water filling my lungs. I couldn't breathe. My knees buckled and I sank to the floor. Outside, the storm raged. The window rattled in its frame. Rain lashed against the glass, furious, endless. I crawled toward it and pressed my forehead to the cold pane, tears spilling freely. Somewhere far away, sirens began to wail, faint at first, then closer. A flash of red light cut through the darkness outside. For a moment I thought it was lightning, but then I saw the reflection. Not blue-white like lightning, but orange. Flickering, alive. Fire. Through the sheets of rain, I could see it, the distant glow from Rainview Towers. It rose against the night sky, devouring the black, painting the clouds red. My mind couldn't hold the image. The building looked like it was bleeding light, like the whole city was burning. I reached for my phone again, dialing Patrick with shaking fingers. My voice barely came out. "There's fire. Rainview Towers." He didn't waste a second. "Stay where you are," he said. "I'll call the police. Don't go anywhere." But I couldn't move even if I wanted to. I stayed on the floor, watching the flames dance in the reflection of my window, while the sound of rain and sirens tangled into one long, endless roar. I thought of Anna, of her small, soft laugh, of the way she always said I'm fine even when she wasn't. I thought of the girl who once whispered, He means well, and how those words had become her prison. And I thought of David, my son, standing in that burning apartment, the firelight turning his face into something I didn't recognize anymore. When the door to my room burst open and a nurse rushed in, I didn't even look up. My tears had dried, but my face felt cold, almost numb. "Marion, are you all right?" she asked. I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "No, I don't think I ever was." She helped me back to bed, tucked the blanket around me. I stared at the ceiling until the storm began to fade. By morning, the rain had stopped. The world outside was gray, washed out, too quiet. News broke on the radio in the dining hall. Fire at Rainview Towers. One casualty confirmed. No names yet. But I already knew. I went back to my room, closed the door, and sat in the silence that followed. It was the kind of silence that comes after everything is gone, the kind that fills the space between guilt and grief. I thought of all the years I had stayed quiet. All the times I told myself not my place, not my fight. And for the first time, I understood what that silence really was. It wasn't protection. It was complicity. Outside, rain began again, soft, steady, cleansing. I let it fall. That night, I understood. Silence isn't safety. It's complicity. The call came at dawn. Patrick's voice was firm, urgent. "They've confirmed a survivor. We're going now." I didn't ask questions. I just grabbed my coat and followed him and Teresa into the gray morning. The rain hadn't stopped, only softened into a mist that hung over the city like breath that refused to fade. The drive to Rainview Towers felt endless. The wipers swished in rhythm, but my thoughts drowned out the sound. Every second stretched like a wire pulled too tight. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. When we arrived, the building was surrounded by flashing red and blue lights. Fire trucks, police cars, an ambulance, chaos frozen in motion. The air smelled of smoke and wet concrete. Patrick showed his ID to an officer and led me past the barricade. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. We climbed the stairs, every step echoing off the walls. At the 18th floor, the hallway was wet, littered with shards of glass and soot. The door to David's apartment hung crooked, the lock splintered. I saw marks on the floor, a struggle, a fight for air, for freedom. Inside, the apartment was a ruin. Smoke stains blackened the walls. A broken lamp lay in the corner. The sound of dripping water came from the bathroom, steady, relentless, like a metronome counting down the seconds of my guilt. A flashlight beam swept across the room. "This way," one of the officers shouted. They forced open the bathroom door, and there, huddled against the wall, soaked to the skin, trembling, was Anna. Her hair was plastered to her face, her eyes wide, unfocused. A medic knelt beside her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Her lips moved, but no words came out. I stepped forward on instinct, my voice breaking. "Anna." She looked up at me, not quite seeing, not quite believing, and then she whispered, barely audible, "Mom." I fell to my knees beside her, taking her cold hands in mine. They were shaking uncontrollably. I wanted to tell her it was over, but the words wouldn't come. I just held her, the way I wish someone had held me 30 years ago. Behind us, a loud voice cut through the noise. "Step back." 2 officers were pulling David out from the bedroom. His face was pale, streaked with soot, eyes burning with a mix of rage and disbelief. The second he saw me, he started thrashing against their grip. "You brought them here, Mom," he shouted, spitting the words like venom. "You couldn't just stay out of it, could you? You ruined everything." I stood up slowly. For the first time in my life, I didn't flinch. "No," I said, my voice steady, cold. "You did this to yourself." He stopped struggling just long enough to meet my eyes. And for a moment I saw not the monster, not the abuser, but the frightened boy I once cradled after his father's rages. That boy was still there, buried under years of anger and violence. But I couldn't save him anymore. The officers pushed him toward the door. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, a flash of light from a police camera caught his face. Wet, twisted, defiant. It was the same look his father had worn the night he first hit me. For a moment, time folded in on itself. I saw 2 versions of myself in that hallway. The young woman, bruised and silent, and the old one standing tall, unbroken. The same rain, the same fear, but not the same ending. Patrick's voice brought me back. "Marion, we need to get you both downstairs." I nodded. The paramedics guided Anna toward the elevator, still wrapped in the blanket, her eyes distant but alive. Teresa followed close behind, murmuring gentle words. As we reached the lobby, I glanced back one last time. David was standing near the exit, surrounded by officers, his wrists bound, his mouth still moving. But the sirens drowned out whatever he was saying. For a moment, our eyes met again. There was no hate in me anymore, only grief. He was my son, my blood. But that night, he had finally become a stranger. Outside, dawn was breaking. The rain had stopped completely. Steam rose from the wet asphalt, curling like ghosts into the morning air. Anna was loaded into the ambulance. Before the doors closed, she turned her head toward me. Her voice was weak but clear. "You came back for me." I smiled through tears. I should have never left. The door shut and the siren wailed as the ambulance disappeared into the pale light. Patrick placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. I watched the sun rise over the smoking city skyline, gray giving way to gold. For the first time in decades, I wasn't running from the past. I was facing it head on. My clothes were soaked, my hands trembling, but I stood tall. The storm inside me was over. This time, I didn't turn away. The courthouse was overflowing. Reporters crowded the steps, cameras flashing like lightning. I had to shield my eyes as Patrick led Anna and me through the chaos. Every headline screamed some version of the same story. Businessman accused of domestic violence by wife and mother. I could hear the whispers even before we entered. She's lying. She's old. She's confused. Inside, the courtroom was cold and sterile, all white walls and polished wood, the kind of place where truth was supposed to feel safe but never did. Anna sat beside Patrick, her hands clasped tight in her lap. Her face looked smaller than I remembered, thinner. She hadn't spoken much since the night of the fire. Her eyes were hollow, but there was something in them, something that refused to die. David sat at the defense table, immaculate in his gray suit, hair slicked back, every inch the respectable man the world wanted him to be. When our eyes met, he didn't look away. He smiled. That same cold, quiet smile I had seen since he was a boy, the one that said he was still in control. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The gavel came down, and the air in the room thickened. Patrick began by laying out the case, the recording Anna had risked everything to capture. He played it once, his voice steady as the sound filled the room. "You think you can leave me? You'll never leave me. No one does." Gasps rippled through the audience. Anna's fingers tightened around mine. David didn't flinch. His attorney rose smoothly, adjusting his tie. "Your Honor," he began, "that recording cannot be verified. It is unauthenticated, easily fabricated. This is the digital age. Voices can be altered, context manipulated. My client's wife is emotionally unstable, and his mother," he glanced at me, "is suffering from cognitive decline." The words hit like stones: senile, unreliable, delusional. Patrick objected, but the defense had planted the seed. The judge allowed the cross-examination. They questioned Anna first. Their lawyer was polite, too polite, the kind of cruelty that hides behind civility. "Mrs. Blake, you say your husband was violent, yet you never filed a report? Why?" Anna's voice trembled. "Because I was scared." He smiled, feigning sympathy. "Scared of your husband? Or scared of losing the lifestyle he provided?" Patrick stood. "Objection." "Sustained," the judge said, but the damage was done. When they called me to the stand, my legs felt like stone. Patrick whispered, "Just speak your truth." The defense attorney smiled as if we were about to share a private joke. "Mrs. Blake, at your age, it's understandable that memory can blur over time. You claim to have witnessed your son harming his wife. Are you certain it wasn't a dream?" The courtroom turned into a blur of faces. I looked at David. He was staring at me, expressionless. For a moment, I almost saw the little boy he used to be, afraid, waiting for me to protect him. But that boy was long gone. "I am certain," I said quietly. "I've lived with nightmares my whole life. This wasn't one of them." A murmur spread through the gallery. The judge called for silence. Still, doubt lingered. Without solid proof beyond the audio, the case was hanging by a thread. Patrick looked grim. After court adjourned for the day, he said, "We need something stronger, something they can't argue with." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the defense lawyer's words: fabricated, senile, unstable. It wasn't just David they were putting on trial. It was us, the women who spoke too late, too softly. The next morning, I went back to Rainview Towers. The building was half boarded up, the smell of smoke still lingering in the air. As I stood there, a woman from one of the lower floors stepped outside to throw out her trash. I recognized her immediately, Leah Jones. Her husband Evan worked night shifts. They had lived next door to David and Anna. I called out to her, "Leah!" She turned surprised. "Mrs. Blake, I thought you left." "I did," I said, "but I need your help." Her eyes darted nervously toward the building. "We don't want any trouble. My husband said—" I cut her off gently. "Leah, I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because the truth is dying in that courtroom." Her face softened. I could see the conflict in her eyes. She hesitated, then said quietly, "We saw it. That night. The argument, the shouting, the way he dragged her. We recorded it from our hallway camera." I froze. "You recorded it?" She nodded. "But we didn't show anyone. We were scared. He has money, connections, and we have kids." I stepped closer and took her hand. "Leah, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's walking through it." Tears welled in her eyes. "You really think it'll matter?" "Yes," I said, "because people like him count on our silence." That evening, Evan called Patrick. The next morning, the Joneses handed over the footage. It was grainy but clear enough. David shouting, Anna pleading, the shove, the slap, the moment the water started running, her scream. The timestamp, the hallway light flickering, undeniable. When court resumed, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Reporters filled every seat. Patrick walked to the center, holding a small flash drive in his hand. "Your Honor," he said, "we have new evidence, provided by witnesses who lived next door." The defense objected immediately, but the judge allowed it. Patrick plugged the drive into the screen. The video played. For 90 seconds, the courtroom was silent except for the sound of David's voice echoing through the speakers. The slap. The water. Anna's sob. When the clip ended, the silence that followed was heavier than any noise could have been. David's head dropped. His shoulders sagged, his hands covered his face. The judge's gavel came down once, sharp and final. "Order in the court." Patrick placed a hand on Anna's shoulder. She was crying, quietly, shaking. But this time they were tears of release, not fear. I reached for her hand and held it tight. David didn't look up again. The bailiff approached, his voice low and firm. "Mr. Blake, you're under arrest." As they led him away, I stood, not out of hatred, but out of something deeper. Grief, closure, justice, in the smallest way the world could offer it. When the doors closed behind him, the room exhaled. Anna turned to me, her face wet with tears. "It's over," she whispered. I nodded. "Yes, but it's also just beginning." Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed again. Voices shouted questions I didn't answer. I only said one thing as we passed through the crowd. The truth doesn't need to scream. It just needs to be seen. That night, back at Silver Pines, I sat by the window, listening to the wind moving through the trees. The world was finally quiet again. Not the silence of fear, but the kind that follows after you've told the truth. I thought about everything we had lost, and everything we had reclaimed. Anna would heal. Slowly, painfully. I would too. Not by forgetting, but by remembering without shame. And for the first time in a very long time, I believed in something again. Not in forgiveness, not even in peace, but in light, small, steady, and true. The truth doesn't need to scream. It only needs to be seen. The courtroom was quieter this time. No cameras, no reporters, just the echo of shoes on marble floors and the low hum of fluorescent lights. It was sentencing day. David sat in front of the judge, his hands cuffed, his suit wrinkled, his eyes hollow. For the first time, he didn't look like the man who had once controlled every room he entered. He looked smaller, not just in stature, but in spirit. The judge read the charges in a measured tone. Assault, coercive control, intent to harm. The words hung heavy in the air. Each one felt like a nail sealing the past shut. When asked if he had anything to say, David stood. His voice, though quieter, still carried that edge, the same sharpness I used to mistake for strength. "She's lying," he said, nodding toward Anna, then turning to me. "And you destroyed your own blood. You wanted to be the hero, but you killed your son instead." The room seemed to stop breathing. I met his gaze. There was no hate left in me, only sorrow, and a strange kind of peace. My voice was calm when I answered. "I didn't kill my son," I said. "I saved what was left of him." He flinched just barely, but I saw it. That single crack in the armor he'd spent years building. The judge's gavel struck once, 3 years imprisonment, 5 years restraining order, no contact with Anna Blake or Marion Blake. It was over. The bailiffs led him toward the exit. As he passed, he turned his head once more. His eyes, in the same blue as mine, met mine for the last time. There was anger there, yes, but also confusion, maybe even fear. He didn't know how to exist without control. When the doors closed behind him, the silence that followed was unlike any other I'd known. It wasn't heavy or suffocating. It was clean. Final. Anna reached for my hand. Her fingers were still trembling, but her grip was steady. She whispered, "You did it." I shook my head. "No," I said softly. "We did." Outside, the morning light poured through the courthouse windows, spilling across the marble floor. It touched everything. The benches, the walls, the faces of strangers who had come to witness the end of a story they didn't live. For a moment I stood still, watching that light reach across the room and land on us. 2 women, bruised but breathing, broken but still here. That light wasn't mercy, it wasn't victory. It was something quieter, truer, freedom. As we stepped outside, the air was cool, the city alive again. Reporters shouted questions we didn't answer. Anna slipped her arm through mine. Together we walked down the courthouse steps, leaving the noise behind. I didn't look back, because some things don't need closure, they just need to end. And in that ending, I found something I thought I lost forever. Not forgiveness, not even happiness, but dignity. I lost my son, but I found my dignity. Time passed quietly, the way it does when you've stopped counting it. Anna rented a small apartment by the sea, a place where the air always smelled of salt and morning rain. The walls were painted white, the windows wide open to the wind. I moved in with her a few months later. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was gentle. The kind that lives between people who no longer need to fill every space with words. Every morning she brewed tea while I painted. Steam from her cup mingled with the faint scent of oil paint and ocean air. The sound of waves replaced the sound of running water, and for the first time in years, it didn't make me flinch. Anna was pregnant. When she told me, we sat in silence for a long while. Then she smiled, a soft, unsure smile, and said, "This baby is proof that we survived." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Then let's make sure it never learned silence the way we did." Outside, gulls flew low over the sea, their wings catching the first light of dawn. Weeks later, I returned to Haven's Light Shelter, not as a patient this time, but as a teacher. I started a small art class for the women who came there, some young, some gray-haired, all carrying stories that lived just beneath their skin. We called it the Voices Project. There were no rules, no talking required, only colors, brushes, and time. Some drew houses, some painted storms. Others, like me, just let the colors run wild, reds that burned, blues that healed. In those sessions, no one needed to explain. The canvas spoke for us. The sound of brushes scraping against wood replaced the sound of screams. Tears fell, sometimes silently, mixing with paint, and that was okay. It wasn't art we were making, it was release. One afternoon, Leah, the neighbor who had given us the video that changed everything, stopped by the shelter. She brought with her a framed photograph of the Rainview Towers building, taken after the fire, sunlight breaking through the smoke. "I wanted you to have this," she said. "You helped us believe we could act, even when we were scared." I looked at the picture. In the center of the frame, the reflection of the rising sun glowed faintly in the broken windows, fragile but unmistakably alive. "Thank you," I said, "for seeing what was real and doing something about it." That night, back at the apartment, Anna sat on the couch, reading through an old journal she'd started during therapy. Her voice was calm, steady. "The day she came for me," she read aloud, "I finally felt seen." I didn't say anything, I just listened. She looked up from the page, smiling through tears. I walked over and placed my hand gently on her belly. The baby kicked once, faintly, a small ripple of life against my palm. "This time," I whispered, "the water brings life." Outside, the sea murmured softly against the shore. The same sound that once terrified me now felt like a lullaby. Sometimes I paint that sound, not the sea itself, but the feeling of it. A wash of blues and golds, where light meets shadow. When I finish, I hang each painting in the studio at Haven's Light. The women say it feels like warmth, even when it rains. Maybe that's what healing really is, not erasing the dark, but learning how to let the light live inside it. And as I stand there, watching the women paint, their hands steady, their faces soft in the glow of the morning sun, I know we've built something lasting, something that can't be taken, burned, or silenced again. We didn't escape the darkness. We learned how to carry light into it. The studio smelled of turpentine and rain. Morning light spilled through the tall windows, turning the air into soft gold. The women had already left for the day. Only I remained, brush still wet in my hand. On the easel stood my newest painting, a woman in a bathroom, her back turned, her face half hidden in mist. Steam rose around her, catching the sunlight that poured through a narrow window. She wasn't frightened. She wasn't trapped. She was simply standing there, breathing, surrounded by quiet that no longer hurt. I stepped back and looked at her. For a long moment, I didn't see paint. I saw myself, the woman I had been, the one who once trembled at the sound of running water. And beside her, I saw Anna, her hand resting on her belly, her face calm, her future untouched by fear. It was strange how a single image could hold a lifetime. The walls of Haven's Light were now filled with these paintings, women reborn in color and silence, telling their stories without a single word. I hung this last one in the center. The sunlight hit the glass, scattering across the room, bouncing from frame to frame until everything glowed. Walls, canvases, air. And then I whispered, almost without realizing. For years, I thought silence was survival. My voice echoed softly in the empty room, but silence was the cage. I put the brush down, hands trembling, not from fear, from release. Speaking, I said, smiling through tears, was the key. For the first time in my life, those words didn't sound like defiance. They sounded like peace. Outside, the waves broke gently against the rocks. Anna stepped into the doorway, her eyes shining. She looked at the painting, then at me. Our reflections overlapped on the glass. Two faces, one life, continuing through another. I didn't say anything more. I didn't need to. The light did the rest. It filled the room, spilling across our faces, soft and infinite.